From battlefield to bomb shelter, from home front to hospital, from volunteer rosters to victims lists, women experience war in distinctive, gendered ways. These are their stories. These are their voices. Welcome to the Voices of Women at Wartime, a podcast by the Center for Women's Justice. I'm Rachel Stomel.
And I'm Rivka Lubitsch.
Voices of Women at Wartime examines how women affect war and how war affects women. These are the unique perspectives and testimonies of women in their own words, a candid conversation that is sometimes hopeful, sometimes heartbreaking, but always honest and always essential.
So the way this war started shocked everyone, not just because of how sudden it was, but the brutality of the massacre was simply beyond comprehension. We're still learning of the horrors that were committed on October 7th, and I think all of us are struggling with the accounts we've read, the pictures we've seen, and the videos we've watched. Some of this brutality was documented and even live streamed by the Hamas terrorists themselves.
And one particularly nightmarish form of violence that we witnessed on October 7th was the sexual violence that was committed against women and girls. Sexual violence in wartime has a specific history, intent, and effect. It's different from other forms of violence, especially in its gendered elements. So understanding what is so different about this gendered form of war crime is important, especially as we push for the international community to acknowledge it and to do something about it.
Israeli women are calling for urgent action from the international community, and we're represented by amazing women such as Dr. Cochav Elkayam Levy and Professor Ruth Halperin-Kadari, who are international experts on topics such as gender and human rights. So we have Dr. Cochav Elkayam Levy here as a guest with us today. Cochav heads the Deborah Institute of Gender and Sustainability Studies and is an expert in international law, human rights, and gender at Hebrew University and Reichman. She recently addressed the UN's Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, called CEDAW for short. I'm going to say it again because the letters are not easy to remember what it is. I keep having to Google it. It's called CEDAW, C-E-D-A-W. It's the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And she's trying to get the international community to see these crimes for what they are. Cochav, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's such a privilege to have you here with us today. Hi.
Thank you so much for having me and having this conversation, this very difficult conversation at a difficult time in Israel. And I do want to share that I truly admire your work for a long time, and I researched these issues, and thank you for hosting this despite all the issues that you've been tackling on your fronts.
We're really glad that you're here. So, Cochav, before we talk about the important work that you've been doing to get the world to recognize what's happened, and especially what's happened to Israeli women, I want to start with a quote that you've been sharing a lot, both in your speech at the UN committee and in your writing. It's a quote from Catherine McKinnon that goes like this: "Human rights principles are based on experience, but the experiences have not been those of women. What most often happens to women escapes the human rights net." So tell us about what that means and why it's relevant right now.
Yes. So I was the very first 2 weeks after the Hamas attack, I felt an urge to read and educate myself as much as I can about former such atrocities that happen in the world. And not only myself, but to make sure that the experts that I'm working with now have the important knowledge about women in conflict areas and that have experienced war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's a very unique and sad area. And Catherine McKinnon wrote about Bosnian women. And she wrote this in light of their experience and in light of her work with them. And the similarities struck me as it was really difficult to read this. And she actually asked, is there international law for Bosnian women? And she was describing the inability of the international community to recognize the crimes committed against them. And I shared this with the committee, echoing the insights that she told us about the fact that the same denial mechanisms that we experience on an individual level when a woman is is raped, the inability to believe her, all the obstacles she has to go through to get justice in regular rape crimes, we see the same mechanism working on a collective level, the same denial mechanism working by the international community. But I think one of the most disturbing fact was that the very committee responsible for women's rights, that, and I want to say it's not a regular committee, it's a committee of experts. It's not a political committee. None of them has a responsibility for their own country. They are actually instructed to represent women wherever they are. And so that was very disappointing that even them were unable to recognize the war crimes or even mention the massacre that happened. So I felt like McKinnon's words about how women escape the human rights net were just something that I had to share with everyone.
I want to push this issue of gender-based violence. Why is gender-based violence different than any other violence in the war? Why is it important to make this distinction?
I think it's an excellent question. And I'm not surprised that you're asking it, because we had to, as international lawyers and international experts, when I teach gender theories or feminist theories in international law, the first thing that I explain is that international law was indifferent to women's suffer and to crimes against women. And it took a while to understand that even feminist perspective was relevant to international law. And why do you think is that? Who are the players? Who are the actors in international law?
Well, they're all men, obviously.
Men also.
Yeah.
But in the international community, we're talking about states, right?
Uh-huh.
States don't have gender. So all the gender perspective on international law is rather new, because it was believed that because the states don't have gender, gender is not relevant. And it took a while to get acknowledgments to crimes committed against women. So I want to say we're still very much, the first book written on feminist perspective in international law was written in 2000. It's just 23 years ago. So I want to say that the recognitions of crimes against women is also very new, relatively. And it's not, how would you say it, neither or. It is what it is. We understood once we were able to look at international law. And when I say international law, I'm also speaking about peace and security and war. It was something conceived to be happening between states. And it took a while to, first of all, acknowledge the extra vulnerability of women in war, and then to understand that women are being used as weapons during a war.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Exactly.
Yeah. So part of the raping of the women is actually...
is weaponizing our bodies.
Part of the war. It's almost like that's the way they're fighting the battle. That's part of the battle, to rape women.
Exactly. It's exactly that. That was part of their instructions to destroy. It's part of a genocide. Catherine McKinnon also quoted Andrea Dworkin talking about the use of women to commit genocide. She called it feminicide. And it evolved over the years, understanding that we don't only need protection, but we are actually being used by our enemies or by men during war to exacerbate the violence and to create really destroy the people during war. I also wanted to share that it's not something new. We saw it during the world wars. It took a while to
I think rape is always part of war. I think what you're saying is right. It's always part of war, but it's conceptualized now as a crime and as part of the battle and not just a side thing that they also did while they were in battle. They also raped. It's
right. Women aren't just the collateral damage. It's nothing that happens alongside the war. It is part of the war. It's intentionally meant to inflict this kind of, genocide and humiliation and every other type of torture.
And we're talking about when it's systematically used,
right.
Not incidentally happens throughout the war, but intentionally. And that was a major development It's kind of weird calling it a development, but it is a major development in the international legal framework, in an international criminal legal framework, to understand that women are being used as weapons of war. And so we see the Security Council, the UN Security Council has already made more than 10 resolutions pointing to this, to the use of women during war in this really horrific way. Also, the International Criminal Court has already recognized crimes against humanity and gender-based crimes against humanity committed against women. So I feel like now we need to understand, I think the greatest challenge is not only recognizing, but preventing it. And I think as Israelis, we're still very much now dealing with the very first stage of recognizing that such a massacre happened. But at the international level, it's not only that they don't recognize it, it's also that they're not able to prevent it. We're not able yet to prevent it, and time will...
just like we weren't able to prevent all the killings and the beheading and all that stuff. I mean, I just want to add to something. They were actually told, the Hamas terrorists, to rape women. It was part of what they were told to do. Do we have proof to that? Do we have that in? It's in the YouTubes that they released.
Yes, the security forces in Israel, we already see that during the investigations of these terrorists, they admit being instructed to rape women, to use them, to kill them in horrific way, to use the most horrific ways of killing civilians. And what's shocking is that they weren't just instructed that minutes before. It was a long time of preparation, mental preparation to get them to commit these crimes. And I'm also in many conversations, it was already published, so I can refer to that we know that we were using drugs to commit these crimes, and to being able to commit such heinous crimes. And that's the most terrible thing to discover.
Because I'll tell you, this is so important. But one of the things that I'm wondering about is to choose out what's happening to women as opposed to what's happening to men. It's like when we talk about the captives that we may get to, I just feel sometimes not right maybe talking about the suffering of women when everyone actually suffered.
It's horrible. Men and women were slaughtered together. Men, women, children, elderly people, elderly persons, persons with disabilities, children with disabilities, babies, they were all slaughtered together. So making this distinction is it's not simple. It's not simple for us. But as we've learned, the vulnerability of women is unfortunately of women and children. That's why we formed a commission, civil commission on crimes of Hamas against women and children, because their vulnerability is greater. The use of their bodies is creating, I don't want to say greater suffer, because it's not greater suffer. That yet again, we discover that women are more vulnerable in this situation, that women and children are more vulnerable, women as mothers, women as being considered as part of weapons of war.
I want to read a piece of one of the things that you wrote, which really drives in, I think, this idea. How can dragging a naked woman, etc., be part of war for liberation? How can murdering a pregnant woman and doing the things that they did to her be considered part of a war of liberation? And how can murdering a baby before the eyes of the mother be considered a war of liberation? In a way, what we're saying is, or what you're saying is, that we understand that there's a war. We understand that people want to fight with each other, but all these things have nothing to do with trying to fight someone or trying to liberate yourselves. It's just torture for the sake of torture.
Exactly. And I think it's a good example of how women's bodies were used during this heinous attack. Shani Look's body was paraded naked to the crowds cheering in Gaza. It was just a horrible scene to see. And I wanted to say at the beginning of the podcast that what I understand today is that the things that we know by collecting all the evidence throughout this past month is something that the Israeli public doesn't know yet. Even the statement that you now read is not something that I said publicly. I sent it to the committee. I talked about it during my speech, but I was very careful to send all the details because I think we need to be very careful, and I understand that we're going to discover much more about how women's bodies were used during the war in ways. It's not only women's bodies, unfortunately, it also girls' bodies, very young girls. I can't really elaborate, and I don't think that it's right to share with you because it's very triggering. But what we know is, as you said, beyond comprehension. It's evil in its worst manner. Its worst possible way.
You mentioned just now the commission that you created to investigate these crimes. And I want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing since the war began. So a few days after the war started, you created this forum of legal and human rights experts. The specific mission of combating the silence and indifference of what feels like all of the international human rights bodies when it comes to the October 7th massacre and what happened here, and specifically about their silence about Hamas's horrific war crimes against women and children. So tell us about what this forum did and the petitions they put.
Yes. So during the first week of the war, while bodies were still not collected and while we saw the most heinous things that we could see broadcasted by Hamas, we understood that human rights bodies, the same bodies that I'm teaching about, that I'm explaining their significant work and their contribution to our understanding of human rights. I feel like I have this, as a law professor, I have this responsibility to explain their importance in the human rights movement. And we were looking at our colleagues at the UN not being able to recognize this and say even that it was a terrorist attack, not even mentioning what happened in October 7th. It was a silence that was unbearable. And we felt that we have to act. We have to take action. We have to get together and at least document what we know from a feminist perspective on what happened to women and babies and children, and be an expert group that can share our expertise with the world. We are all international law lawyers, international relations and gender experts and human rights experts. We gathered together. I gathered them on the 8th day of the war. And we started drafting these petitions, a civil petition, an women's rights petition, a civil society petition, and a legal analysis that I led of crimes against humanity committed by Hamas. And I want to say that even though we sent this letter to the UN, where we presented it to President Biden, we made sure that our colleagues have this information about what happened here. Still, even CEDAW, as I said, is not a political body. We see the differences between different bodies around the UN. Even CEDAW, the group of experts that was supposed to say most basically that there was a massacre, was not able to do that.
That's crazy.
Yes. I want to talk about 3 stages that we want to see happening at the international level. So once such a terrible massacre, I don't think massacre is even, we're trying to atrocities. While such atrocities are happening, we want to see the international community, first of all, recognizing what happened. We usually UN bodies would say this and that happened. We know there are many civilian casualties. Even the very basic details or the very basic data that they have, what they do is that they usually report it. And that way they generate a response by other bodies. So that's the first stage of recognition of what happened. The second stage is to condemn the crimes, to condemn what happened, to express solidarity, to express shock, to express the fact that such crimes were committed. And the third stage that we want to see is them acting, helping survivors, making humanitarian bodies starting to act and to offer their help. And what we saw is we're now a month after the October 7th, and we're not even seeing the first stage of recognition.
Can you just repeat that? There was recognition. What was the second stage?
To condemn the crime.
Okay. So there's recognition, there's to condemn, and then there's helping. Okay. That's great. Because I never really knew what the UN did. So now I'm getting an idea of what they're supposed to be doing.
This is in theory still. I mean, the point
I know. They're not doing anything. This is so important that they haven't even recognized it.
They haven't even recognized it. And even by recognizing it, they're allowing other bodies to act, to respond, to condemn. And by not recognize it, we are just staying with incitement.
It's almost like denying. It's almost like they're denying by not recognizing it.
It's worse than denial. It's worse than denial because they're not even generating the proper response. And I have the words, I feel like I have the words in Hebrew to express the fact that we were shocked and amazed. And it's such a...
Do you feel that like betrayed by these people?
It's not only a betrayal of the Jewish people. It's not only a betrayal of us Israelis, Jews, Christians, Muslims who were attacked during this terrorist
pogrom massacre.
Yes, during this terrible pogrom. I think it's a betrayal of the human rights movement, of our ability to understand human rights as collective norms that we share as human.
But why is that? Why is it because we're Jews? I mean, is that the bottom line, that we're Jewish people? What is it? What's wrong with them?
So it's a question that I've been also asking myself. It's a question that we're asking ourselves. And I've been asked that several times during this past few weeks. And it's difficult to respond because it is anti-Semitism. We have to say this. It is a huge part of it is anti-Semitism. And other reasons that we can point to is that the fact that the UN has a majority of Muslim countries that are systematically targeting Israel and acting in ways to delegitimize the state of Israel, to delegitimize Israel as the state of the Jewish people. So we're used to it, but now it's more than that. The thing that I wanted to mention is that UN Women, the agency that was created by the UN to recognize crimes against women, to protect women's rights, was not even able to, till now, it wasn't even able to recognize that such 7th of October crimes and 7th of October events. And so we know that they received credible information about what happened. So I remain speechless.
What is there to do now? I mean, what can we just push the more and more information into their face? Sorry, I'm feeling very aggressive.
I think they have enough information. As I said, they have more information than the Israeli public. They know much more than us. They've received information even from Arab communication.
Right. It's not like the Arabs are denying it. I mean, they're putting out the information. We're taking it from them. You know, the Hamas is boasting all these things. So what's to deny here? It's just, this thing is driving me crazy.
So I think it's a lesson in history that we're all going to be learning. We know for sure that they have all the information. We know for sure that they have more information than we do. We know for sure that they saw Hamas attacks because they were broadcasted in Hebrew, in English, in Arab. They have all the information. So their actions, as I said, are betrayal of inhumanity. So what we are doing right now is trying to find allies that have expressed moral clarity on these issues. And the UN already has all the information. They're going to be judged by future generations on their response during this atrocity. And I think as an expert, I know that there are going to be thousands of research groups just studying their inability to acknowledge these crimes. But I don't care about it at the moment. I don't want to waste our times and energies. We've done our best. We have sent them information. We'll continue to send them information. We'll continue to provide a credible source and send them reports and everything that we have. But now we are focusing on working with allies at the EU, around the United States, just to make sure we are, I think, through working together with groups that have already recognized and have already shown this more clarity about what happened, and even about what's happening to the people of Gaza. They are also captives of Hamas. They are also, so I think we're going to work with these kinds of allies to think together about ways to understand what happened, to document the crimes, to collect testimonies, to do everything in our power to make the voices of women heard.
Part of the aim of putting out all those letters and the petitions and making the commission is not just to point a finger at the organizations that are doing nothing and saying, why are you doing nothing? You should act, but also to find the people who are willing to act and to kind of coalesce these people to fix the situation and do something about it.
Exactly.
This has been a very hard discussion, and I know you're so busy, Cochav, doing other things. I don't want to feel that we took your energy. I don't know how you cope. I don't know how you sleep. I don't know how you live. I don't know how you breathe.
It's very difficult. And we're going to, I'm actually now making sure that our group has emotional support.
Absolutely.
Because it's very, very difficult. But we support each other, and it's been hard. It's been hard. I think only this week I was able to finally cry. And to just...
That actually helps. Crying.
Yes.
I found that one day I burst out crying because most of the time I'm just tense. But crying, actually, I just said, okay, keep crying because it really helped.
Wow, really, exactly. That's what happened. And I felt that during this past 4 weeks, I was just keeping myself as strong as possible for these women that we represent, for, I think, the Jewish people, for our history, for what we know happened, and to make sure people have the right information and that they have a voice. That was all the purpose of what we do, that women as individuals have a voice, that civil society has a voice to share what happened here, and that we as experts have a voice in front of these human rights bodies. And so this week, after a lot of things that we did, I felt like I can just let myself process everything we've been through.
Thank you, Dr. Cochav Elkayam Levy, for speaking to us today and sharing your expertise with us. I am proud to know that you and others are out there fighting for us and helping us clearly articulate what happens, even if we may not get justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you to our listeners. By listening to this podcast, you are a witness. Giving these voices your attention means giving them power. If you, like us, agree that women's stories are essential to the Israeli narrative, subscribe to the Voices of Women at Wartime wherever you get your podcasts, and encourage your friends to listen and subscribe too. If you have thoughts, questions, or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media on the Center for Women's Justice page on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever.
Thank you, Rabbi Scott Kahn, for recording and editing. I am Rivka Lubitch, and I was here with Rachel Stomel. Stay safe.